There are plenty of statements about money and romance throughout the entirety of the White Lotus series, but seasons 1 and 2 are very clearly organized around these respective ideas. Season 1 was the season of class. Its stories revolved around capital, around privilege. Season 2 was the season of love. Its stories revolved around the power dynamics of sex, around desire, around chemistry. The way that each of these concepts are used as storytelling foundations for the show's multiple mini narratives gave each season of the show a distinct purpose. Mike White strategically employed those concepts to ensure that White Lotus would not merely be a messy mixture of hotel guest subplots, that each season of the show would offer a rather multifaceted but super cohesive statement on the human condition. And the promise of the show's excursion to Thailand in season 3 was to use spirituality and religion as the foundations of this season, the conceptual suns that all the different stories would revolve around. I will never forget how excited I was learning that theology could be the bedrock of a season of this show. So, that is not what season 3 of White Lotus turned out to be. In fact, I believe it is the exact show that seasons 1 and 2 wanted to avoid being. It is a sloppy clashing of the storylines of about a dozen hotel guests that fails to give a reason as to why this assembly of individuals needed to spend 8 hours together on our screens. These stories do not complement each other, they do not feed into each other like the ones in seasons 1 and 2 did. Honestly, while thinking about the season, I came to the conclusion that the closest comp I could imagine for it was the garbage plate. Yes, the garbage plate. The dish with hamburger meat, macaroni salad, home fries, baked beans, whatever else they decide to put on there. The garbage plate is a clashing of things that don't belong together, but it can have miraculous bites to it, moments where you see the vision of its creator perfectly and wish every bite could be just that good. And White Lotus has these moments this year, no different than the moments it offered in 2021 and 2022. But the story of the garbage plate is that those few bites don't represent the overall experience of eating that dish, because as you keep on eating away, as you keep on digging, you keep on finding things you don't like. You keep on finding things that are unpleasant or disgusting, and ultimately you realize that these things simply were never meant to go together in the first place. And that is White Lotus season 3. While it may have its peaks, you just walk away not really seeing why Mike White thought these storylines together added up to something truly special. Season 3 has 5 major storyline branches to cover. There's the Ratliff family, there's Rick and Chelsea, which eventually evolves into Rick and Frank, there's the 3 women, there's the misadventures of Belinda and Greg/Gary, and then there's Guy Talk. And I think it's most appropriate to start with the Ratliff family, because I think that Piper's story, out of all of the ones that we got this season, was where I thought the show was going to go this year. The whole reason why the family is going to Thailand is for Piper's senior thesis, which is on Buddhism. It seemed to me that the Ratliff family would spend a lot of time talking about Buddhism. Piper would defend its merits and the family would push back. The Buddhism of the monks would be contrasted with the Christianity of the Ratliffs. White would say something about how either Christianity is complicit in the avarice of the US and its families, or that the Ratliffs and other families like them have actually in fact abandoned religion altogether and are the purest form of materialists. They have made possessions their idols and are in fact godless. And I think that latter idea, that the Ratliffs and other families similar to them have in fact no ties to religion, would be complemented quite nicely by Tim's storyline, as Tim, the father, was involved in some money laundering scheme at his firm, and it's now a matter of when, not if, he's locked up for past crimes. It seemed like there was a gold mine of ideas to tap into that could be tied into each of the Ratliffs and their stories, but so much of the time with the 5 members is wasted, pissed away on moments, on scenes that just don't contribute that much to a statement on the family overall, let alone a statement on family and its ties to religion like I thought was originally intended. So much of Ratliff's screen time is wasted on the behavior of the parents. Parker Posey does not get it done for me at all. Victoria Ratliff is a pretty clear replacement for Tanya. She certainly matches the character in zaniness, but does not at all match that character in terms of wit and likability. And I'll admit, it takes time to adjust to Tanya. It takes a few episodes to appreciate that performance and what that character does for the show. But Victoria Ratliff never got over that likability hump for me, and what we're left with is an annoying net of a character that doesn't deliver big laughs and also eats into the value of the other members of the family. While Victoria could have been a representation of some of the Christian ideas that Piper is meant to clash with, Victoria isn't round enough of a character to stand for much of anything at all. A character this paper thin fails to be an adequate embodiment of certain ideals or be considered a successful play off an archetype, which is usually Mike White's go-to form of characterization. She is comedic relief with no added features, no bells and whistles to her, and so many times when the Ratliff storyline could be saying something about religion, or at least the values this American family is supposed to symbolize in a given scene, she ruins it with another drawl-heavy delivery. Tim is better than Victoria and Isaacs is better than Posey, but also fails to realize his full potential. This is largely a result of Tim being forced into a lorazepam-induced daze for way too much of Season 3. The specifics are never given, but we know that Tim committed some notable white-collar crime prior to arriving in Thailand, and he finds out while there he is not getting away with this. And I get the intent. I get there may be value in replicating what a man like Tim would be going through, and spending an episode where he's just a wreck and borderline nonverbal is not a flatly bad idea. But Tim is not present, not truly present with his family, for what amounts to over half his screen time in episodes 3 through 6. He is looking off into the distance, pondering God knows what. On the one hand, it's certainly a showcase for Isaacs, maybe enough to nab him an Emmy nom, but it's a choice that puts the performance of an individual over the sophistication of the journey that a character goes through, and in my mind, that's a bad trade-off. And I do want to be fair to the parents, because they have a super strong episode 8, and that scene between Tim Parker and Victoria is nothing short of superb in my eyes. But I think it's very important to identify that's the exception, not the norm when it comes to those characters. And if you just look at Parker Posey's performance in that scene, it's maybe the only one in the entire season where she plays it straight the majority of the runtime. Yes, she has that thumbs up at the end, and that's very funny. I have no problem admitting that. But overall, she brings an honesty and a realism to that character that's absent for those other 7 episodes. And I couldn't help but think to myself, wow, this character is representing something in this scene. She is a very specific type of American mother that Mike White is trying to poke fun at and critique. And in those other episodes, she's just mispronouncing the names of Asian dishes. She is asking where her pills are at. She is acting oblivious to the things around her. I couldn't help but feel if this character just forced me to engage a bit more in what she was saying, if she was a bit more substance and a bit less punchline, she could have been a real hit. And Tim is similarly great in episode 8. I think that Mike White overall does kind of make the case that, hey, possessions really have become this family's true religion, but I don't think it's a statement that he earns. Like, we can say at the end, oh, this actually was about religion the entire time, but at the end of the day, Saxon and Lachlan are not presented as super materialists for the rest of the season. You could say that Saxon and Lachlan have problems. Saxon has problems with women. Lachlan has problems being a people pleaser, but none of them seem overly reliant on materials the way that Victoria and Piper are. So I don't think it's a statement that is overall earned by Mike White. I don't think that he intertwines money and religion and values enough in this season. There are times where he definitely succeeds, like when Tim is talking about his time as an altar boy or when he's talking to Saxon about balance in life, but overall, I think you would have needed more conversations between Tim and his other kids, Saxon and Lachlan, and you would have needed more, perhaps about Tim's upbringing or his kind of relation with religion in order to make something count there. So then we get to the kids, and the kids are not all right. So Mike White from episode 1 teases that incest is going to play a role with these 3 characters. Lachlan is acting weird towards Saxon. Saxon is acting weird towards Piper. Something's going on here, but I simply do not understand what this storyline amounts to and what it says. So Piper is kind of heavily involved in this storyline until she just isn't anymore. In the first 3 episodes, there is a considerable amount of effort put into developing an unsettling dynamic between her and Saxon, and to a lesser extent her and Lachlan, and they're both pretty unsettling. It is successful in that regard. And then in episode 4, Lachlan and Saxon stay on the boat, she doesn't, and then it's gone. All of that hard work is pretty much wasted because she's taken off the chessboard. And yes, it is kind of revisited in episode 7 between her and Lachlan in that one exchange in his room, but at the end of the day, I don't know why you would involve Piper in this to begin with, to just abandon it halfway through the season. Why not spend that earlier time really focusing on the clash between her and her parents instead of doing all that? But the thing is, I have the answer to my own question. Piper has to be used in that way in episodes 1 through 3 because she's the red herring. She could have been a more complex, more interesting character, but she had to be used in order to divert people away from suspecting what we all knew to be true. The main event of the incest storyline was inevitably going to be Saxon and Lachlan. So, Before I discuss those moments and the, we'll call it, merit of those scenes, I just want to say that Mike White does not earn those moments between Saxon and Lachlan. And I say that because the dynamic between Saxon and Lachlan is not even as sophisticated as the dynamics between Piper and Saxon or Piper and Lachlan, where in those early episodes, there is something bubbling beneath the surface. There are exchanges, there are moments where you feel uneasy that something could happen between these characters. And that's not what you get at all with Saxon and Lachlan. Yes, there's that very overt scene in episode 1 where Lachlan is looking at Saxon, but it's not as though these characters are giving each other looks, they're not standing in a certain way, they're not behaving a certain way that would make you feel as though, oh, something is going to go on here. And again, that's to just divert people away from suspecting what eventually is going to happen. And that's why I can't fucking take the storyline seriously. Because it's not as though we gradually build up to those moments in episodes 5 and 6. It's not as though that our sense of dread comes from a place of, oh, the characters are acting in a certain way that suggests something could happen. Our sense of dread comes from White Lotus's history. Its history of bizarre moments. And us knowing weird stuff has happened, we should probably anticipate the worst here. And Mike White, playing off the legacy of the show in that regard, is, in my opinion, the cheapest and lamest thing this show has done yet. And if Mike White was really committed to this story, if he actually wanted to say it wasn't just for shock value, why in episode 7 is Saxon fine? Why does he not feel resentment towards Chloe? Why is he not so disturbed by the events that happened in the previous 2 episodes? Why is he acting normally? Because ultimately, Mike White is there for the shock value of those moments and not much else. And that's not to say that things that are done mainly for the sake of shock value have to be bad, because the exchange between Rick and Frank, I believe, is also done mainly for the sake of shock value. But there are genuine things to appreciate about the performances there, of both Rockwell and Goggins. And hell, Goggins, I think, has created some of the most iconic, funny moments in the show with some of his facial expressions in that scene, even though the scene as a whole may be a bit disturbing and shocking to watch. I don't think you can really appreciate those scenes between Saxon and Lachlan in the same way. And also, it's also kind of repugnant to see that stuff on the screen. Why would I watch episodes 5 and 6 in full ever again? How could I convince myself that watching those episodes in full is a good use of my time when I'm not even convinced Mike White wanted to go all in on this storyline and really just wanted to have those moments there so people would talk about them? And then we get to Rick and Chelsea, which eventually evolves into Rick and Frank. But that's kind of the problem, because Rick and Chelsea are dynamite together, and it's very easy to imagine a world where old curmudgeon man and young hopeful woman together gets either very stale or unnecessarily mean rather quickly, but it doesn't, and I think that's mainly a tribute to the brilliant Walton Goggins, who is the best actor on the show this year, and carries over all of his expert comedic timing from The Righteous Gemstones into this season. He also, I think, smartly keeps Rick from being so rude to the point of being unlikable. Amy Lou Wood similarly has great comedic instincts and knows how to make her character get under Rick's skin without being irritating to the audience. They certainly have their moments when they're apart, but they're simply better together. When they are in each other's presence, they have a healthy amount of laugh-out-loud worthy moments, and they're just kind of interesting to observe, like when Greg and Chloe are fighting at the dinner table, and Rick and Chelsea are shooting each other looks like, oh my god, at least we're not as much of a disaster as this couple. Like, it's just such a great acting moment. And unlike Victoria Ratliff, these characters are not exclusively there to deliver laughs. They serve a greater purpose, and the moments of seriousness between them are among the best in the season. The problem is, halfway through, they're separated. Without Rick, Chelsea is just kind of hanging about. She doesn't serve much of a purpose beyond trying to keep Rick from the dark side, and so when he leaves, she becomes a non-factor. She, yes, is on the periphery of the Lachlan-Saxon stuff, but besides that one line about Saxon having no soul, she simply doesn't contribute much. With respect to Rick, I already mentioned the Frank stuff, which I do believe has value, but overall, I was deeply unimpressed with the Rick revenge subplot. While I am interested in Rick's current state of affairs, his brokenness, and seeming awareness that he is broken, I'm not super interested in what broke him in the first place. And then, when Rick confronts the man that quote-unquote broke him, he magically turns into all these other characters from other revenge plots. I've been fantasizing about this moment all my life. Don't you know who so-and-so is? Don't you remember them? It's such a cliched and underwhelming scene, and I just can't help but think, wow, this is such a trite point for the show to be making, and I can't help but expect a little more nuance from Mike White. It takes 6 full episodes for Rick to encounter the man he thinks killed his father, which ultimately means so much of Rick's dialogue is samey. It is him repeating that he has to find this guy, that he just needs to talk to him, that he needs to head to Bangkok. It's so much repetition, so much of Rick saying the same things over and over, and I can't help but think this storyline and season overall would have been much improved with an episode less of material. There is simply too much filler here. And the same thing applies for the Jacqueline, Laurie, and Kate storyline. This is a good story, but one that wears out its welcome thanks to how uneventful it is. It felt like after the Trump conversation, there just needed to be more mini explosions between these characters, more moments of confrontation and cracks forming. I don't think Laurie and Jacqueline needed to pull each other's hair out, but man, it felt like White Lotus 2 already demonstrated how to do a story like this. The tension between the two couples slowly grows, and by episode 5, Harper's bluntness at the wine tasting trip early on in the episode and her behavior later that night at dinner change how the characters interact with each other for the rest of the season and subsequently keeps the story from getting stale. With the trio of women after the Trump conversation, in episode 4 they take no issue with each other and just kind of get sprayed with water in a rather awkwardly shot and short-lived set piece. In episode 5, it's kind of Kate that takes position against Laurie and Jacqueline, but her feelings are underserved for the rest of the season because the Jacqueline and Laurie stuff becomes the main event. But Jacqueline and Laurie just kind of weave around each other for all of episode 6 before Laurie crashes out in 7. Like the case with Rick, these 3 women are rather enjoyable to watch on screen, but I'd say 2 full episodes spent with them are filler and waste time, keeping these women in a fake nice state with each other instead of gradually revealing the ugly parts of their friendship. Again, it's something that I'd argue was done rather masterfully in season 2, but mishandled here. So that brings us to the other main characters who were not the traditional guests because they don't arrive by the main boat, and that's Belinda and Gaitak. So Belinda in season 1 works because she was the straight man to the exaggerated Tanya. No, I don't think anyone really thought Belinda was one of the better parts of that season, but she was absolutely necessary. She served a purpose being the base to Tanya's acid. In season 3, with no funny man to play off of, Belinda becomes the most dreadfully boring part of the show. Because she is fundamentally good, you do root for her, but her having the personality of sandpaper more or less ruins all her time on screen. What's funny is that in the after-episode breakdown of 7, Rothwell says that Belinda, looking at Greg's house, is kind of impressed by the opulence, implying that the wealth he promises her is alluring, and all I could think to myself was, that wasn't in the episode. It may have been in the script. Rothwell may have thought that to herself while performing, but in no way do we see her, Belinda, weigh the money against her morals. In that same after episode, there is mention of Belinda being depressed, and yet again, I just got none of that from the material I saw. Granted, I was definitely on my phone for some of the conversations she had with Pornchai, but again, I can't help but think there were a bunch of complexities to Belinda that were in the heads of White and Rothwell, but weren't successfully translated to the screen, and the end result is a truly basic character who is nothing short of exhausting to watch when put in contrast with these other twisted but colorful personalities. And then, to bring us home is Gaitak. What interested me about Gaitak and Mook was that Gaitak initially seems like an Albie, the white knight who can never think he's doing anything wrong with women. I really thought Mook would have just simply turned him down, but her continued interest in him and the relative sweetness of their storyline in comparison to the utterly depraved stuff we see elsewhere in the season made it a kind of pleasant watch as the story unfolded. But then in episode 7, when all the cards were out on the table, I was disappointed in the ultimate point of the story, just like I was with Rick's revenge plot. Mook wanted him because she thought he was developing a killer instinct and getting a promotion. Something something, people are attracted to violence. Something something, what does this say about society if you need to be an aggressor in order to move up the food chain in capitalism? It's such a tired, one-note message to convey, and like the other ones that are in this season, they simply don't resonate like the ones made in previous years on this show. Now, in an alternate universe where each of these 5 storylines are just wildly entertaining even though they don't have a lot of connection to each other, this would be a different story. I think there would be a fair amount of people who would stand up for Season 3 in spite of the lack of connective tissue, but these subplots just simply aren't that strong on their own. Rick and Gaitok storylines are let down by incredibly basic messaging. Rick and the three friends storylines are stuffed with filler. Belinda is bland. Piper is bland. Saxon is a douche and is not deep enough to justify his character being this unlikable. Lachlan is basically a supervillain who wants to sleep with his brother and his sister. His mom is a pale imitation of a character already on the show. The dad is wasted on having Jason Isaacs looking dazed and confused for a whole season. Also filler. Which brings me back to my initial point and that food analogy. Seasons 1 and 2 were dishes with a lot going on. They were beef Wellington or Peking duck. They had a lot going on in them, but you couldn't imagine one element being removed because then the dish simply wouldn't be the same anymore. It wouldn't be as good. And season 3 is that garbage plate where none of these stories were really designed to complement each other. You start imagining what it would look like if some of those ingredients were removed, and it doesn't really matter what stays or goes. It seems as though trimming the fat of the dish would just make it better. Like when you think about it, the connective tissue here with these stories is the flaws. That's how these stories are bound. The same issues pop up again and again, and those are the ones that I'll remember this season by. The blandness of some of its characters, the tiresome padding of some of its storylines, and the untapped potential of some really initially promising Mike White creations. It's a season that I think is defined by shortcomings, but it's not meritless either. I think all 5 storyline branches do get off to relatively promising starts early on. I think the Rick and Chelsea stuff is kind of worth the price of admission alone. I think the Jacqueline, Laurie, and Kate storyline, on top of the stuff I said earlier, is capped off in a brilliantly scored, written, performed scene in episode 8, and I think the Mook and Gaitok stuff is not just good and kind of refreshing against the other subplots in this season, but really against the context of the entire show as well. And so it's not all bad here. And I'm not even, I think, prepared to call this a full-on bad season of TV, but it's not a good one either. And I was shocked, really, when IGN gave this a 6 out of 10 on the whole. There's no way this is going to be a mediocre, middling season of television, but it's exactly that. I feel as though I would go between like a 5.7 and a 5.8 on White Lotus Season 3, and that's what I got. I think it will be an aberration for the series as a whole. I'm expecting strong stuff in Season 4, but I don't think this was nearly as good as the first 2 seasons of the series. So thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you next time.